Lasting only from the 23rd of October to the 10th of November in 1956, the Hungarian Revolution changed the nature of the Cold War as well as the relationship between the Soviet Union and the countries under its sphere of influence. While the uprising was a technical failure, its profound legacy can be found in its underlying causes and effects. Hungarian conflict with the Soviet Union primarily started during World War II, when it was an Axis power and participated in the invasion of the Soviet Union. However, when in 1944 Soviet armies prepared to invade, Hungary rapidly tried to make negotiations with the Allies until these plans were halted when Germany invaded and set up a pro-Axis regime, the Government of National Utility. While this stopped the Hungarian negotiations, it did not stop the impending Soviet arrival, and consequently, when they invaded in 1945, they took control and put down the Hungarian and German resistance. Their multi-party democracy was therefore replaced when the Communist Party merged with the Social Democratic Party to form the Hungarian Working People's Party in 1949. This new government attempted to socialize the economy through radical nationalization, causing economic stagnation, lowering the people's standards of living, and causing deep malice. This new communist state also then came under the authoritarian leadership of Matthias Rákosi, whose first goal was to eliminate threats to his power in the people. The intelligent were the first to come under attack. Rákosi created a series of purges to rid of opposition. His victims, Titoists, Western agents, or Trotskyists, were chosen just for participating in religion or in the Spanish Civil War. Half of the middle-class officials were purged, over 7,000 people, to avoid any others taking or challenging his power. With this seizure of control came leadership of the Államvédelmi Hatóság, or AVH, after the Interior Ministry lost control. This police force already used intimidation, falsified accusations, imprisonment, and torture to carry out their goals, and under the leadership of the Working People's Party, in 1950, it relocated thousands of people to claim their property and housing for party members, and removed the threat of the intellectual middle class. 26,000 people were arrested, tortured, tried, imprisoned in concentration camps, deported to the east, or executed. A large portion of the population forced into poor living conditions, while interned as slave labor on collective farms. Aside from this agenda of terror, the communist intervention ensued. The Rákosi government made Russian language study and communist political instruction mandatory in schools, and church leaders were replaced by those loyal to the government, the nationalization of religion deeply angering the religious population. The Russian-Hungarian connection was further strengthened on May 14, 1955, as the Warsaw Pact bound Hungary to the Soviet Union, its economy and independence crushed. Soviet influence forced the already crippled nation to pay $300 million in war reparations, causing the highest historic rates of hyperinflation and pushing the suffering people to look elsewhere for aid. Later, a violent worker uprising in Poland in June 1956 over trade negotiations gave Hungary hope for similar concessions, but as they were not receiving them, they hopefully and expectantly turned to the United States for intervention. However, during the Cold War, America attempted to weaken the Soviet Union through economic and psychological warfare against its territories, including Hungary, and from a propaganda standpoint, it looked better if Russia harshly turned on and crushed uprisings. While in the summer of 1956, U.S.-Hungary relations finally began to improve with the possibility of bilateral trade to improve and fix Hungary's damaged economy, the Hungarian Ministry of International Affairs cut off communications in fear it would weaken communist rule. At this point, the people needed a change that began with Imre Nagy coming into power. Nagy started the new course to slow down Russia's unrealistic industrialization and allow peasants to lead the collectivization of farms, but these plans were postponed, angering the people, when Rákosi and then Ernő Gerő, just as unfavored, were put into power again. The writers and students were the first to voice their criticism, on October 23rd, resurrecting the banned Mefes Student Union. Students from the Technical University met to finalize demands on the 22nd, calling for a new government led by Nagy with political pluralism, a new economic policy, and Rákosi on trial. With the authorization for a peaceful protest by the Minister of Interior, the students marched through central Budapest, starting from the statue of Petőfi, a famous revolutionist who fought for democratic change and Hungarian independence, then to the statue of Joseph Bem, the national hero. Peter Veres, the president of the Writers' Union, read their manifesto to the crowd, demanding Hungary to be independent from all foreign powers, with a political system based on democratic socialism, the ability to join the United Nations, and the rights of free men. The censored patriotic poem, The National Song, was read, which states, this we swear, that we will no longer be slaves." The poem read while the crowd cut out the communist coat of arms from the Hungarian flags. The crowd tried to broadcast their protest through Radio Free Europe, so by the time they reached the Parliament building, there were 200,000 protesters. As the AVH tried to detain protesters that entered the radio building, it only fueled rioters, prompting the AVH to fire on the protesters from the rooftops and throw tear gas down on them, and the rioters to shoot back. Erno Gero spoke out, condemning the rioters, but this only prompted them to take down the statue of Stalin that a church site was destroyed to make room for, leaving only the Hungarian flag in his boots. By that night, Imre Nagy had replaced Gero after workers' councils took control of the Hungarian People's Party. Nagy amended his new course to include political pluralism and Hungarian withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact, which he carried out on November 1st, provoking Soviet military intervention and the violent section of the uprising to begin, Nikita Khrushchev approving the entrance of the Red Army.
This is battered Budapest under the brutal Russian boot. Soviet tanks roam the streets amid the ruins they made, as communist secret police hunt down heroic freedom fighters. Here for all the world to see is grim evidence of the brutality and savagery with which the red tanks blasted a defenseless people and their city.
Thousands of people organized into militias to combat the AVH and Soviet troops, releasing former prisoners and detaining and killing pro-Soviet communists, while striking across the country and fighting with homemade Molotov cocktails. Armed revolutionaries overtook tanks and set up barricades to deflect the vast resources at the Soviets' disposal. At the building of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, militias attacked with execution of dozens of suspected communists, state security members, and military personnel. Hungarian soldiers sent to help the AVH tore the red stars off their hats and joined the protesters, chanting "Russians go home, away with Gero, and long live Nagy." Surprised at the magnitude of the uprising, the Central Committee of the Communist Party appointed János Kadar. He and Nagy started negotiations for a ceasefire, but this farce ended on November 4th, when large forces of over 75,000 troops, 2,500 tanks invaded the major cities. Over 25,000 Hungarians and 7,000 Soviet soldiers were killed, 200,000 Hungarians fleeing as refugees in the aftermath. After the Hungarian Revolution officially ended, Imre Nagy and many of the revolutionaries were executed, and János Kadar declared on November 8th that Hungary would not withdraw from the Warsaw Pact, and its new government would be the Revolutionary Worker-Peasant Government. In his 15-point program, he justified Soviet intervention and claimed he would protect the people from the revolutionaries in Budapest, increase their standard of living, and eliminate the bureaucracy. In the aftermath of the revolution, the country was destroyed, cities burnt down, and the economy and population entered a many-decade-long repression. The American hope of a different version of communism from that of Stalin was crushed too. Khrushchev had promised America and Hungary could have peaceful relations, but its brutality against Hungary became America's justification for the continuation of the Cold War. However, while Russia maintained control over the Iron Curtain, its behavior polarized communists in the West and all over the world, including in Russian territories, pushing them to arms against the Soviets. The uprising was the first major anti-Soviet action taken, and it was the figurative tear in the Iron Curtain that would later cause it to become unseamed, serving as the cause for self-determination and independence from the suppression of Soviet communism throughout Europe. 3 decades later, in 1989, the tear finally tore open the Iron Curtain, and on October 23rd was made a national holiday, the Soviet troops finally receding from Hungary.